to reconvene this regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners for Tuesday, September 25th, 2018, and this is our afternoon session. And our first item of business is item 12A, which is the second reading and public hearing for ordinance number PA 1363 in the matter of amending Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan to add a quarry to the inventory of significant mineral and aggregate sites, authorize mining and processing as provided by Oregon Administrative Rules, OAR 660-023-0180, and amending the Rural Comprehensive Plan to redesignate land from Forest F to Natural Resource Mineral NRM and rezone that land from non-impacted forest land F1 zone to quarry and mine operations QM zone, requiring a site review of the proposed mining operations pursuant to Lane Code 162574A through J, repealing ordinance PA 1343 and adopting savings and severability clauses, planning file number 509 PA 05392, remand and original files 509 PA 15 05803 and 509 PA 15 05804. And first, the purpose of this hearing is to accept evidence and hear arguments limited to the Land Use Board of Appeals remand decision, final opinion and order. The board's decision in this matter is subject to the criteria cited in the agenda cover memo and attachments. Testimony and any written evidence and argument must be directed towards the approval criteria. This remand hearing is a continuation of a Type 4 decision process for which the board will conduct an on-the-record hearing. The board will conduct the remand hearing to review and address the issues related to the assignments of error upon which LUBA based its remand decision. The board may only consider issues identified in the LUBA decision on the basis for the remand. And at this time, I would like to call for disclosure of board member ex parte contacts for any abstentions due to conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts or biases, and then call for any challenge to the hearing authority's qualifications to hear the matter. Commissioner Sorensen.
I have none.
Commissioner Lyken.
None.
Commissioner Farr.
I have none.
Commissioner Williams.
None.
And I have none. And I will again call for any challenges to the our ability to hear this matter. Seeing none, I'd like to remind folks that personal conduct during the hearing is governed by Lane Code 140702, which provides that folks behave in a civilized manner. I won't read the entire list. We have keep a copy of our expectations in the back if you ever want to see it, and it's easy to find online. So at this time, I'll call for the staff report, and after the staff report, I will open the public hearing. Deanna?
I'm leaving at 2:30.
Oh, sure, Commissioner Williams, real quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be needing to leave at 2:30 this afternoon, so thank you.
And we'll watch the meeting later.
I will watch the meeting as presented on Metro.
Thank you. So with that, Deanna, I'm sorry for the interruption.
Hello, Chair and Board of Commissioners. For the record, I am Deanna Wright, staff who is processing this remand. Today, the board is being asked to hear testimony and review evidence during a remand hearing on Old Hazeldale Quarry, plan amendment, and zone change. As some of you may recall, this application was approved by the board in a 4-to-1 vote in March of 2017. The decision was appealed to Land Use Board of Appeals, in which LUBA issued a remanded decision in January 2018. In May, the applicant requested local proceedings for the remand to begin. Notice was given to parties of the previous proceedings on August 31st, 2018 regarding this remand hearing. Staff understands the scope of the remand hearing is limited to 3 remanded items in the LUBA order and include, number 1, scope of the acreage being added to the inventory. Number 2, consideration of conflicts with big game range. Number 3, conflicts caused by off-site discharges with 5 sub-issues, which include silica dust, air pollutant dispersion modeling, net air quality benefit emission offsets, air blast and ground vibrations, and groundwater impacts. Per lane code and case law, all testimony and the decision must be limited to the remanded items in the LUBA order in this quasi-judicial process. Now I'm just going to summarize staff's analysis provided in the agenda cover memo. I've also prepared a slide listing the items on remand. Regarding scope of acreage being added to the inventory, LUBA opined we incorrectly added too much property on the significant inventory. Upon remand, the county should only add 46 acres of the property where the significant aggregate resource is located and omit 61 acres where no significant aggregate is located. The applicant and staff are in agreement with this conclusion. Regarding consideration of conflicts with big game range, LUBA opined the county erred in concluding that the county was not required to consider conflicts between the project and the inventory of big game habitat within the impact area. LUBA agreed with opponents that the county did adopt a big game habitat range as a significant 1C inventory. As a result, the applicant has addressed the conflicts to big game range in their supplemental findings. Additionally, the revised findings include a finding which states the county has inventoried big game range as a significant Goal 5 resource that applies to much of the project area. Based upon the applicant's expert testimony, the applicant requests the board find that displacement and collision conflict will not cause a significant conflict of resident elk and deer in the impact area. The applicant notes much of the impact is reduced per existing conditions number 21 through 24, and by adding a signage condition warning drivers of deer and elk in the area. Please note, staff did make a recommendation in the cover memo to change the applicant's proposed signage condition to omit the speed reduction proposal along Dunning Road due to safety concerns in which the applicant was in agreement. Regarding conflicts caused by off-site discharges, on appeal, petitioners contended that the original findings and condition were only concerned with visible dust and not concerned with smaller silica dust particles. LUBA sustained this issue. On remand, the applicant is requesting that the board find that there are reasonable and practicable measures that will minimize potential silica dust conflicts associated with the project to a level that is not significant. As support for this conclusion, the applicant hired a consultant to evaluate dust emissions from all aspects of the proposed operation. Based on this report, the consultant is recommending 3 additional best management practices listed in the cover memo. Additionally, condition of approval 28 through 33 and number 44 were identified to reduce impacts of dust, and they remain unchanged. Based upon the supplemental testimony, the applicant requests the board find that silica dust conflicts would be minimized to a level that is not significant. LUBA agreed with petitioners on remand and directed the applicant to either submit air dispersion modeling or explain why the modeling requirement is not applicable under the state's new source review program. In support of this issue, the applicant submitted supplemental testimony from their consultant, which found that air dispersion modeling is not applicable because the project's emission rates will be below levels that trigger the requirement to conduct the modeling through the state's new source review program. Thus, the applicant is requesting the board find that the modeling data is not applicable. For a source subject to the state's new source review program, the owner or operator of the facility must demonstrate a new air quality benefit. LUBA sustained this issue and directed the applicant to address it. The applicant requests that the board find that the project is not required to show a net air quality benefit to provide offsets because the rules are only applicable if a source is subject to the state's new source review program. And as explained previously, the quarry does not appear to be subject to the state new source review. Therefore, it would appear none of these provisions are applicable. Opponents contended that the county erred by failing to identify air blast and ground vibration from blasting as conflicts that needed to be minimized. LUBA sustained this issue and directed the applicant to address it. As a result, the applicant has submitted supplemental evidence from 2 of their consultants, an acoustic engineer and a blaster in the aggregate industry. Based upon this testimony, the applicant is now proposing 4 additional blasting conditions listed in the cover memo. The applicant states that requiring these conditions will ensure that blasting at the project site conforms to the applicable state and federal standards. Based upon this testimony and subject to imposing additional conditions of approval, the applicant requests that the board find that air blast and vibration conflicts associated with the project would be minimized to a level that is no longer significant. In the original decision, the board found that the applicant's proposal to install upgradient berms to channel stormwater around the former Dunning Road dump into designated stormwater areas would prevent stormwater impacts to the former landfill. On appeal, the petitioners contended that the board findings was inadequate because the reference condition number 8 did not actually require the upgradient berms. The applicant believed this flaw was a Scribner's error. LUBA stated the shortcoming can be relatively easy to correct on remand. Thus, the applicant believes 2 actions should take place. First, the board should revise condition of approval number 8 to require the installation of the upgradient berms. And second, the board should replace the superseded figure 6 in attachment 1, exhibit A to ordinance 1343 with the correct version showing the upgradient berms. By adopting a new ordinance with the correct version of figure 6 and corrected condition number 8, the board should find that conflicts to groundwater are minimized. Staff did receive some emails and letters after the notice went out and has forwarded them to you. These items received are as of 5 p.m. yesterday. In conclusion, it appears the applicant has sufficiently addressed the deficiencies listed in the LUBA remand. However, staff anticipates other parties may wish to submit additional responsive testimony today. Should this be the case, we respectfully recommend the board close the public hearing but keep the record open and deliberate at a later date certain. With this option, staff would be able to prepare a supplemental memo prior to deliberations limited to the issues in the remand order. Staff understands the applicant will have a couple presentations today that will likely get more into the details of the technical analysis than I did today in my summary, but I am available to answer questions should they arise during the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on the staff report before we move to the hearing? And I'm going to open the public hearing for this ordinance number PA 1363. It will start with the applicant's testimony, then it will be testimonies of persons in favor, testimonies of other persons, then testimony of persons opposed to the proposal, then any additional comments by staff and council concerning the testimony, and then an applicant will have final opportunity for rebuttal. And at that point, we may conclude the hearing. But that'll depend on a motion of the board. So we will start out with the applicant, and I understand you guys need, what, about 20 minutes or so?
Might creep closer to 30, but I'll summarize quickly.
Okay, thank you. So if you'll give your name and your address for the record as you begin your testimony, and I'll remind all people to do that.
Good afternoon, Chair Bozovich and fellow commissioners. My name is Steve Pfeiffer. I'm a land use attorney with Perkins Coie, and I represented this particular client on this matter in the prior proceeding. Address is 1120 Northwest Cooch, Portland, Oregon 97209. Deanna has done a thorough job of identifying, and they're depicted there on the screen, the issues that come back on remand. And as Deanna's testimony and the statement you read at the outset confirm, and as you know from practical experience, what you have in a case of a remand is an opportunity to address only those issues that do come back, and those are what Deanna summarized and are there. We'll follow as suit with a number of the authors of the substantive expert testimony and reports that we submitted in May with our package requesting that we proceed with this action by the board on remand. The first two of the issues, one of them, even Luba related as a Scrivener error, is truly that. It just means putting the right graphic in the right place with the right number in the conditions that did include the berm that we had mentioned. The second is perhaps not a Scrivener's error, but it's clear confirmation from Luba that when putting an aggregate site or any other Goal 5 resource on an inventory, you limit it not to the parcel size, but to the area that's been surveyed and identified as significant, which in this case is the actual resource site of 46 acres as opposed to the area larger that's being mapped for aggregate, because that larger area won't be mined, portions of it, it'll be the subject of processing and related activities, including buffers. The remaining issues are truly substantive technical issues. What Luba asked for was, in many cases, an explanation with guidance on what that explanation from the county, should you reapprove, must address. That's the subject of our testimony today. We'll have 4 speakers following me. And I'll just give them in the front end so you know what's coming, who's coming, and what they're going to be talking about as they come up here. Each of them will speak for 6 to 8 minutes, and hence my comment that we may approach 30, but we'll try very hard not to exceed that. The first speaker is Jessica Stark with SLR, who's an air consultant, and will speak to the dust emission issue in the various forms, including the LRAPA standards and the inapplicability of those particular criteria. The next speaker will be Jerry Wallace, who is a blasting consultant and has prepared not only a response to the issues that Luba had identified on air pressure and vibration impacts associated with blasting, but we have taken that up a notch, and in my experience, it's a very sophisticated piece of work that he's prepared in the form of a blasting plan, which is more than a condition. It's literally a protocol established from an engineering standpoint, as Jerry will explain, which will dictate both the blasting activity, the preparation for it, the conduct of it, and the notice of the results thereafter. Jerry will speak to that. Following Jerry will be Kerry Stanley, who's spoke to you before when we were in Oak Ridge in the first round, as I recall, and he'll speak to the concussive aspects of the DEQ noise rule, which by its term implies that it has to do with audible noise. But in fact, as Kerry will explain, and as he's provided testimony from the person at DEQ authored that rule, it actually does go to air pressure. Again, a technical piece that some of you will probably get to quicker than I will. And the last consultant who will speak today is Jason Robinson, who will go to the report that he authored, which addresses the potential for impact on the elk or the big game habitat designation and the mitigation measures that we've proposed to ensure that that doesn't become a significant impact, if at all. And with that, I'll take any questions, but otherwise we'll just begin with Jessica.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Stark. I'm a principal engineer with SLR, a consulting firm. Do you need my address also? 1800 Blankenship Road, Suite 440, West Lynn, Oregon 97068. So I performed a review of the 3 questions that were raised by the board, which Deanna already went through. Dispersion modeling, produce modeling, or explain why modeling is unnecessary to demonstrate compliance with ambient standards. State new source review, demonstrate why offsets for impacts to air quality are not required. And silica dust, clarify whether the regulations and conditions in the decision are sufficient to minimize silica fugitive dust emissions. So the first 2 questions can be answered by minor source permitting requirements. Proposed sources of emissions in the state of Oregon, which have emissions over certain thresholds called significant emission rates, or SERs, have to meet several requirements in new source review permitting. One of those requirements is to do dispersion modeling to quantify your impacts to ambient air that would result from the project. In non-attainment areas, such as Oak Ridge, where ambient pollutant levels are above the standards, sources which will emit that pollutant in a significant amount must provide offsets to balance the new proposed emissions. So these are areas that already have bad air quality. When the tonnage of emissions of a particular pollutant is less than the SER, the emissions increase for that pollutant is not significant, and the NSR analysis is not required for that pollutant. So dispersion modeling and offsets are not applicable requirements for the old Hazeldale quarry because the emissions will not be significant under the rules. And for particulate, the pollutant of biggest concern for this project, the SERs are very low. The SER for PM 2.5 is 10 tons per year. So projects below 10 tons per year of PM 2.5 do not materially affect the ambient air quality in the area. So respirable silica. The visible dust emissions that are going to be produced by the old Hazeldale quarry operations will contain a portion of these invisible respirable silica particles. The control of the visible dust emissions will also control the particles which are too small to see. The silica particles are not going to occur by themselves. It's always going to be part of dust that you can see, and the controls to control that dust are going to prevent the health impacts from potential silica. So the air contaminant discharge permit that the quarry is going to operate under does not allow fugitive dust emissions, and so compliance with the air permit is going to protect the community. So these are some of the ACDP conditions related to fugitive dust. The permittee must control fugitive dust emissions by controlling vehicle speeds on unpaved roadways, treating vehicular traffic areas of the plant under the control of the permittee. So this will be all unpaved roads and paved roads within the quarry site. They have to operate all air contaminant generating processes so that the fugitive type dust associated with the operations will be adequately controlled at all times. They have to treat storage piles as necessary so they don't get wind-blown dust off of those piles. Prompt removal of tracked out material from paved streets. This would be trucks leaving the site and going onto the public roadways. If they were to leave trails of dirt, they'd have to clean that up, but they're actually going to have a wheel washing station, so tracked out emissions are not expected. And then storing collected materials from air pollution control equipment in covered containers. This would be, on a drilling rig, if they have a dust capture device and they capture dust, they have to keep that in closed containers until disposal so it doesn't get re-released into the environment. Another permit condition that they will have is the work practice standard. The use of water sprays or equivalent control is required when the source of minerals to be crushed does not contain adequate moisture to suppress dust conditions. So they're going to be watering. I think we can all relate to driving on unpaved roads in the summer in Oregon, and you have a big plume behind you, and when you drive on those roads in the winter, you see nothing. It's moist, it rains a lot here, it turns to mud. So they really will have to be doing the work practices in the summer in the dry conditions. So many measures to control fugitive dust are included as the conditions of approval, and operation in compliance with the air permit and these conditions of approval is going to prevent those respirable silica impacts to the community. And that is all I have. If you have questions.
I have two very quick questions. Can you kind of put in perspective what 10 tons per year PM2.5, what is there an emitter you could describe that would be equal to 10 tons per year?
Hard to say. That's 55 pounds a day, so you can kind of picture if you were operating year-round. Power plants, big sources like that, they'll have over 100 tons a year of PM and hundreds of tons of things like CO. And 10 tons of PM is a pretty small amount, but it is set that low for PM because that's where they've realized, that sometimes above that, they see impacts.
And then second to that is the SERs on this. Would this, under the new Cleaner Air Oregon, for air toxics, I know that's not in place and implemented yet, but would this still be considered below the need for air modeling under the cleaner air?
Every source in Oregon that is going to have an air permit will have to evaluate Cleaner Air Oregon compliance. And so they will, when those rules are in place, have to look at it. And they will determine if they even have any toxic emissions. I mean, there's nothing in this dust that is going to, off the top of my head, be on that list of toxics, but
I sat on the Rules Advisory Committee for it, so
okay, yeah.
somewhat aware, but yeah,
they'll
666
there's a lot of
compounds
lot of
and families of compounds. I don't think that there are any really in our native rock that would meet those air toxics.
Yeah, I
Just
don't
wanted-
think so.
Wanted to clarify that there's not an upcoming tripwire that would generate the need for the modeling.
Nope, they'll be required to look at it just like every other quarry in the state operating under the permit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bozovich and fellow commissioners. My name is Jerry Wallace. I'm a blasting consultant. My address is 110 Crestview Lane, Crestview spelled with a K, Woodland, Washington, zip code 98674. I've been retained, excuse me, by the owner of the property to evaluate whether blasting can be done in a safe, prudent, and professional manner on the property, and that blasting can be done economically and safely for the public nearby. And I've concluded that it can be. I prepared a presentation, but it would run over 20 minutes. They've said I could have 5 to 7, so I'll make it short here and take questions. First off, blasting in the United States is regulated. The state of Oregon is quite highly regulated. We have the Mine Safety and Health Administration that is involved in worker safety and dust control issues and such as that for the people on the mine. As the previous speaker mentioned, we have dust control containment systems on the drills now so that the drill dust is collected right at the site and disposed of properly right there without entering out into the public areas. The National Fire Protective Association through NFPA 495 has recommendations for regulations on how to conduct blasting operations. The state of Oregon has adopted most of those, including those that have to do with air overpressures, which is a combination of what you refer to as air blast and sound, but also includes those that are beneath the hearing threshold of humans, and what the impact can be off-site and also with ground vibrations. The amount of ground vibrations that are allowed to be produced at the mine cannot exceed 50% of the minimum threshold value that would crack crack lath and plaster, which is the most fragile item in residential construction. The air overpressure limit is less than 50% of what could damage the most fragile item in a residential construction, which is glass. The blasting contractors in the state of Oregon operate under these strict standards and comply with them on just about every project, every blast. Now, when we start talking about blasting at this project, the blasting event itself will take less than 1 second, start to finish. And the effects of it will take less than 3 seconds because you have a tripling effect at distance of the vibration. If they blast 6 to 8 times a year, you're going to have less than 1 minute of impact from the blasting on the public, on the animals in the area, and other things. And additionally, in particular on air overpressure, air blasts, and the items that may startle, we're talking about properly designed blasts with the explosives properly confined in drill holes. And it's not like fireworks going off with the big booms going on continuously or such, that most you get a low-level whoomp, and that is often the result of the overpressure as they move the rock, displace rock into the front of things. Vibration levels that are allowable are less than the strain placed on a residential structure by temperature changes, wind, and other items on a daily basis. So if you take a residence here in the winter, it'll be 38 degrees and raining nastily, and inside you have a 70-degree dry house, and you open the door and start carrying groceries into the house from outside, you have a weather collision that puts more strain on parts of that residential structure than will the blasting. So it's my conclusion that if the standards that are in existence and the standards that Lane County has on this quarry are complied with, and there should be no reason that they cannot comply with them. They're reasonable and professionally done, and any quality professional blasting contractor can do so. That this can be done without negative impact from the blasting on the neighbors or on the animals. I'll take any questions if you have them.
So just one quick question, because it's come up in some of the written testimony we've received so far. You mentioned that, you know, they have to keep the vibration level at the property line, basically 50% of what could damage lath and plaster. Is there any concern about vibration and well, damage to wells?
It's my experience as a blaster. I've blasted to improve wells that have had flow rate problems. Over the course of time, say a 20-year life of a domestic well, you'll get silt to come into the cracks and seams that flow the water to the well, and they'll stop producing. And you can actually go put a small charge in the well and improve it. Secondly, there's a very large study on this subject called the McCutcheonville study, and they studied thousands of wells. I have that I would be happy to send along to the county for their review, but the chance of affecting a well off the property are very low, minimal, and close to nil. To damage a well, you usually have to have an impact where the well is within your design pattern or immediately adjacent to it.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and Chair. My name is Kerry Stanley. I'm at 15399 Southwest Burgundy Street, Tigard, Oregon, 97224. I'm here representing ABD Engineering and Design. I was an employee of theirs for a year. I sold my business, Daly Stanley and Associates, to that firm, and then retired from that firm, but I still consult on the side here. So anyway, I'm here to just talk with you about the fact that it appeared that to me that when LUBA made their decision that they, like the opponents, misunderstood that the DEQ regulation for noise actually addresses the air overpressure or the air blast that was a concern. So I presented submitted a letter to you in the packet in which I explained that it was my understanding after 30 years of working with quarry mining noise studies that the DEQ blast permit or regulation was intended to protect both audible and the effects of audible and inaudible noise. And what we have when we have an explosion is we have both inaudible and audible sound. So I contacted the original manager of the DEQ noise control office, and he was the person involved in the writing of the regulation, and his letter back to my question to him is part of the record, asking him about was that in fact the intent of the regulation was to control the effects of air blast, and he responded positively saying yes, they selected the values both daytime and nighttime to address the effects of both the inaudible and the audible sound. So with that, I still conclude the way it was originally presented in our report, our noise study report for the quarry, that, and by the way, the DEQ regulation actually is more restrictive than the NFPA regulation. So even though, as Mr. Wallace stated, they'll meet the NFPA standards, the DEQ standards are going to control it even more. So and that's shown out over the years since the regulation has been in place. I'll just give you one example where when they were doing the blasting for the tunnel, the east or west side tunnel for the light rail, they had 24-hour blasting allowed. Once they went into the nighttime blasting, they began to have complaints vociferous complaints, I would say, about the impact that they were having. And they thought it was the ground vibration they were experiencing, but it turns out it was the air overpressure. And we were called in to assist the county, Washington County, to review it. And what we found is they were well over the daytime standard at night because they had used the wrong weighting factor in their measurements. They were using the A weighting, and the standard is in C weighting. And the C weighting takes into account the low frequency energy, which blasting has a lot of. Once they modified their blasting, put in some controls, the levels were reduced below the nighttime standard, all the complaints went away. And that was an example of how the regulation has been successful in controlling impacts on the people and their structures, the DEQ regulations. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, I'll leave it at that.
I guess that just brings one question to my mind, which is who actually, in a quarry mining operation, would verify that blasting is meeting that DEQ standard?
My experience has been counties require the applicant to provide that. In fact, Mr. Wallace will be monitoring the air overpressure for the NFPA regulation. We've been pulled in before to monitor blasting from the DEQ regulation. So you could put that as a condition that I think, in fact, that's been proposed, that monitoring will be done for a certain period of time, and that data will be provided to the county to demonstrate that they are in compliance.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thanks, Kerry.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. My name is Jason Robinson. I represent Northwest Resource Solutions, LLC, 125 Fur Ridge Lane, Roseburg, Oregon, 97471. Northwest Resource Solutions was hired to evaluate conflicts to big game range with the impact area identified as the area within the 1,500 feet mark from the 46-acre mining site. So we're just looking at the impact area for big game range. Our analysis, which is on record, identifies potential conflicts resulting from the proposed mining operations to big game and their habitats and proposes measures to minimize those conflicts. The impact area, excluding the adjacent industrial park and other non-big game features, is approximately 486 acres, just to give you an idea of scope and scale. For our analysis, we utilized peer-reviewed literature, local planning documents and records, conversations with local state biologists, interviews with our client, independent site visits, and professional knowledge to conduct this assessment. And I think as we start thinking about big impacts to big games range, we have to understand the baseline disturbance threshold for the big game that utilize that range. So when talking about these impacts, property consists of approximately 183 acres of that area, and a significant portion of these acres on that property will not be impacted at all, so they'll continue to provide the same benefits they've always provided to big game. Project area is surrounded by an active railroad, a private airstrip, several roads, a gun club, the city of Oak Ridge, an industrial park, Highway 58, and there's a variety of recreational opportunities as uses. So as we look at the baseline use of this site and the noise disturbance thresholds that these deer and elk have to go through each day, it's higher than normal for this particular area. If we look at the baseline habitat conditions and populations on the site, the impact area consists of 3 primary habitat types. We have open meadow, early seral, high canopy conifer forest with diverse understory and dense regenerated Douglas fir stands. Deer populations in the area are very few. There are resident deer, and according to communications to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, there aren't any routine surveys done in this area, but deer populations are few in this area. With regards to elk populations around the Oak Ridge proper, there are approximately 300 animals that make up several groups of 40 animals or more, based on personal communications with Christopher Yee, who is the district biologist for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Also based on field observations at the site, we know that deer and elk are using the site. The potential conflicts that Northwest Resource Solutions identified are as follows. When we look at the overall range within the impact area, the 486 acres, there's no specific impacts to that landscape because those areas are not going to be removed. So that cover habitat is still going to be there to provide for refugia, thermal cover, and other things. There are, however, going to be short-term displacement to deer and elk populations, primarily due to disturbance and disruption impacts associated with activities. There's also a potential likelihood of an increase in collision rates due to increased use in movement of black-tailed deer and elk from the site. These conflicts are more thoroughly described in our report, which is on record. Some of the rationale I want to provide is that as we look at this once again, the habitat within the impact area, it's divided into two types of habitat, major big game and peripheral big game, and the majority of that peripheral big game has been written off as poor habitat. The major big game will remain within its current habitat conditions, so there's no impacts to that big game range. When we look at deer and elk movements across the landscape and a home range distribution, deer and elk are naturally going to move within that home range, and so as they are disturbed, they will reposition themselves across the landscape, primarily due to that disturbance. It's likely that on this particular property, because the habitat will remain intact, that the animals may redistribute for a portion of time when disturbance occurs, but they will continue to utilize the property for a portion of their life history strategy. One of the other things I wanted to just circle back on is that these local populations of deer and elk, unlike populations that might be found out in the wilderness areas or in other areas where there's limited disturbance, are already highly impacted. So as they have adapted over time to high levels of impacts, they will continue to adapt so within their home range. Proposed mitigation measures that we have listed out is looking at reductions in vehicle speed notification of potential conflicts along the roads, and also looking at noise mitigation measures the applicant has proposed. And so within that, we would look at ensuring compliance with DEQ noise regulations, utilizing berms, buffers, and screens to knock down noise impacts, using mufflers and radiator fan controls on vehicles to cut noise impacts, and also retaining a 20-foot high natural barrier to the east side of the quarry to reduce noise impacts as well. This concludes my summary at this time. I'll take any questions.
Any questions?
Okay. Thank you very much.
We're close, Chair, but that's the end of our testimony, unless you have any questions of me.
No, and you actually managed under a half hour.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. So with that, we'll take our testimony from the public. Excuse me. And I don't have anyone signed up either in favor or neutral. Is there anyone that didn't get signed up that is either in favor or neutral to the applicant? Then I'll start testimony in opposition. And the first person signed up is Anna Jane May, followed by Tim Coughlin.
I'm Anna Jane May. I'm in Oak Ridge, Oregon, 48425 Hill Street in Oak Ridge. I'm right where there would be dust falling on my house if the silica trucks were started coming, 80 trucks a day. I already have silicosis. It would highly affect me. It's like a little bit of poison in your water instead of a lot, you know. And they talked about the impact of breaking on plaster, but an eggshell of an eagle is a lot thinner than that. And their emotions are a lot more astute for the rumbling and bumping of bombing, and it's just wrong. It's actually deplorable to me that they even asked to have this again when they realize the impact on the community and the animals and the air. And our water is already in stress, and they want to use 5,000 gallons a day, which we're already stressed in our town for clean water. It's, the rights of nature has to be looked at some point here, because an elk calving isn't going to go, oh, it only took a second. You know, they're not going to go, oh, that's okay. They're going to run away, and they're not going to come back. You know, they might think they or hope they or say they're going to come back, but when they start blasting, animals don't decide that oh, that'll go away, or that's not going to hurt us. They're afraid they'll go away. We'll lose our elk. We'll lose our eagles. We'll lose our environment. And so I deplore you to do the right thing, and that's stop this quarry.
Thank you. Tim Coughlin, followed by Dennis Patterson.
Hello, my name's Tim Coughlin. I'm at 48943 Roberts Ranch Road. So I have 60 acres immediately adjacent on the south side of the project boundary. And if you look at it from the air, I have 60 acres basically of grassland, and it's surrounded by forest. And so the proposed quarry is a different type of habitat. And I have no fences on there, but the animals that are in this large watershed area, this is more of an airshed. They depend, we have different blocks of types of habitat. And the big game that are there, they move freely through all the blocks at different times of the year. They utilize all of it. And so it would be like, an example, what if I took my 60 acres and put a big fence all around it to block off the elk and to raise quarter horses? It would have an effect on my neighbors and the elk population, I guarantee it. It's very important how they're allowed to be able to use the entire area in this airshed. So the thought that it's not going to have any impact on these elk, it's just wrong. They're going to it's going to have a major impact on the elk herds, so I implore you to at least postpone approving this until we can have a further review and gather more information. As far as my health, I'm a retired firefighter with the Forest Service for 30 years, and my lungs are bad. And the thought of how much they're proposing to go into the air every day is just unacceptable. We already have periods in Oak Ridge. We have a very small valley, and it's an elderly population. A lot of them are, and there's young people in there. And to think about making these time periods worse with our air quality is just unacceptable. I mean, it's a very small valley. Lane County is quite large, and these gyms of these small towns around need to be protected. And to let an open pit mine right into this very small valley where our population is, it's just going to be detrimental to a lot of it. So that's something on the silica dust that's just a zero starter for many of us. And like the previous speaker, our groundwater is an issue right now that we're working through to where to get the water for the future and to all the different uses that we have. And so there again, I implore you to at least give this process more time to gather information on some of these issues that we find deplorable, the folks that live there. So any questions for me? I appreciate your time, and thank you to the county folks for all the work that they do for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dennis Patterson, followed by Louis Portnoy. Pokorny? Sorry, I probably got that all wrong.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Dennis Patterson, 47871 First Street, Oak Ridge. My concern also is for silica dust. We had a town hall meeting a couple of years ago, and the Hazeldale Quarry people put on a presentation, and during a lull, I went up and asked one of them, I said, well, I understand about the measures you're going to try and put in place for the dust in the quarry, but these 88 trucks a day that leave the quarry and go down the 58, what's oversight will there be over those? He says, oh, that's the trucking company's problem. That's not ours. And while that might be legally accurate, it doesn't do a thing for us residents in Oak Ridge. If you've ever been behind a gravel truck on a highway or freeway, you've been aware of the little stuff that gets past their tarp and pings on the front of your windshield in your car. Well, just imagine the stuff you can't see or hear, all the dust, all the deadly silica dust. Our town is in basically a box canyon. We get a nice breeze in there, but it doesn't really move anything out. It just stirs the cauldron, as it were. The dust that settles along the 58, which, by the way, is the center of our town. Most of our restaurants, our supermarkets, stores, they're all on the 58. So there's a good deal of activity going on in the 58. It's not like it's off the far edge. All this dust from the quarry, the trucks coming out of the quarry, all this gravel is going to be settling during those first few bumpy miles. And it's going to grind against itself, and it's going to be a lot of dust coming out of that and settling right there on the sides of the roads. And every 18-wheeler that comes by is going to stir this up freshly. Who's going to breathe it in? The bicyclists, the pedestrians, the people in the motorized wheelchairs, ladies and their children being pushed along in a cart. They're all going to be breathing this. On top of this, the 58 is only 250 yards from our high school football field and its adjacent baseball diamond. Even worse, it's only 200 yards from our Head Start preschool. 200 yards may sound like a great distance in the city, but if you've been out on the highway and somebody's plowing a field and you've had all this dust blow in across there, you know 200 yards is nothing. I would hate to think that we're dooming the children of Oak Ridge to develop lung disease by the time they're 20. I'll leave you with one thought. It is far easier to prevent an ecological disaster than it is to try and clean it up after the fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Lewis or Lois, I think Lewis, and I'm sorry for murdering your last name, followed by Michael Garvin.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, staff. My name is Louis Picorni, and I live at 49153 Dunning Road, Oak Ridge, Oregon. I have lived here for 68 plus years on family-owned property within 1/4 mile of the proposed operation. My wife and I, Kathy, are against mining within we are within the 1,500-foot line that they have designated from our house. Can the LLC guarantee our drinking water for domestic use after blasting to loosen rock? My opinion, no. We have experts that say they are experts, but it's not their drinking water. The county recommendation was to post, this pertains to the animals. The county recommendation is to post speed signs of 25 miles an hour. There are signs on Dunning Road where it connects with Fish Hatchery Road and farther up that say 15 miles an hour. But either way, miles per hour does not make any difference to the animals. A fawn was hit and killed last year in front of our house, and we buried it in our back field. The elk calve on the northeast portion of TV Butte, I know that to be true. They are born in June, then show them off after that in about 2 to 3 weeks. Many are born in a Scotch broom patch where it is very thick and private. Lane County requires that the operator of the quarry build and maintain what they call a wheel wash. But will it be used, is my question. Why would any driver of an 80,000-pound truck want to wet their brakes before driving off down a hill? What about in freezing conditions? The biggest question, one of the big questions is, who is going to actually be physically responsible for making sure all of the Lane County and Dagami's rules and regulations are followed by the quarry operators. The owner of the property has not once shown his face during this whole process. None of the people he has paid to represent him are quarry operators. Our concern is that the company who eventually steps forward to operate the quarry is going to say, well, we did not agree with all those restrictions. We are going to operate our way instead. The money people behind this operation do not have even a fair record of standing up to follow rules or to see a project through to the end. And I thank you for affording me this time to speak today.
Thank you. So Michael Garvin, followed by Peter Roof. Wolf?
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Garvin. I reside at 47840 West Oak Road. I run a small distillery on East First Street in Uptown Oak Ridge. I have the same concerns voiced by Louis Picorni regarding elk habitat. As a second business, I have a restoration forest company called Warner Creek Company, and I'm familiar with the game restrictions that we have to follow as we work in the forest as far as nesting seasons, calving seasons, and otherwise undue disruption of habitat during our operations. And I am concerned that not only this is not going to go well with my COPD, as far as silica dust and such as that, but you are going to impact the water and the wildlife of that region negatively. I would like you to reconsider the approval you handed out last time. This is our place up there, and it means a lot that we managed to succeed in growing Oak Ridge again. It's been a hard 20 years, and it's starting to succeed, and this is not going to help us a bit. Thank you.
Peter Roof, followed by Joan Peterkin.
Hello, my name is Peter Rolfe, 1298 Sunny Drive here in Eugene. I'm going to share an email that I sent to the Board of Commissioners yesterday. I'm writing to you today in regards to the proposed rezoning of TV Butte and Oak Ridge for the purpose of quarry operations. I do so in the capacity of a voting Lane County resident, a relative of business-owning Oak Ridge residents, a mountain biker, hunter and outdoorsman, a systems scientist in training, an entrepreneur who sees great potential in Lane County. Since moving to Oregon several years ago to be close to my wife's family, Oak Ridge has become my spiritual home, and as such I have a particularly strong vested interest in the community and the surrounding lands. As such, my interests are entangled with a multitude of stakeholder groups who will be negatively affected by a project that has minimal upside, that only benefits the land investor and the mining company. On moral grounds, the needs and benefits of the many outweigh the needs and benefits of the few. To summarize, the mining company may be profitable for up to 35 to 50 years, although with my academic knowledge of trends in energy and fuel sources, the climate, and the economy, I am highly skeptical that those claims are achievable. The land investor may be profitable leasing the rights to this mining company for a time. However, there are other potentially profitable commercial options that would not only benefit the land investor, but also benefit the citizens of Oak Ridge, as well as the commerce flowing between Lane County and points east via the Highway 58 corridor. Think about solar, wind energy generation for battery recharging. Furthermore, alternative commercial projects that minimize the impact on the natural ecology and community can create options for future sustainable wealth generation in perpetuity instead of a one-time irreversible project. Whoa.
Somebody up on the roof.
Hallelujah.
Hitting me on the head would have been a sign.
I've heard somebody up on the roof, so somebody must be up there.
They're filming up there, I think.
Greg, you want to try and check up on that? Yeah.
Thank you. Furthermore, Alternative commercial projects that minimize the impact on the natural ecology and community can create options for further sustainable wealth generation in perpetuity instead of a one-time irreversible project that would leave the town and the county poorer for generations to come. And what are the negative impacts of approving TV Butte for quarry operations? Air noise pollution that will affect the health and quality of life of local residents. Loss of elk habitat will affect local and visiting hunters. Proximity to the Bunchgrass Trail will affect mountain bikers and hikers, some of which travel many miles to visit the region that has become world-renowned for its scenery and outdoor opportunities. Cultural artifacts from indigenous camps will be desecrated, and the skyline from town will be aesthetically altered, impacting a local economy that has slowly rebuilt itself over the years and that depends on visitors from out of state and abroad who wish to relax at the local pub and restaurants and take in breathtaking scenery, not cough-inducing silica plumes emanating from a hilltop that has been leveled. The visionary system scientists Von Forrester claimed that our ethical imperative is to act always so as to increase the number of choices. This principle is supported by contemporary global thought leaders, and with the looming uncertainties that we face with energy, the climate, and the economy, it is of vital importance that we make decisions with this principle in mind. Rezoning this parcel of land for mining is not only unethical, but is utterly foolish given the availability of other win-win options that benefit the great majority of stakeholder groups, both in the short term and for generations to come. Given what is publicly known about this dispute, it would be grossly incompetent and profoundly embarrassing for the county commissioners to approve this quarry project. Thank you.
Got Kathy Corney, followed by Jeff Allen. Or sorry, I forgot Joan Peterkin. Sorry, I was jumping, then Kathy. My apologies. In between pages.
Commissioners, my name is Joan Peterkin. I live at 49149 Dunning Road in Oak Ridge, outside of Oak Ridge. And I wasn't prepared to speak, but someone who could not be here has a letter that we would like to add to the documents. I will paraphrase it because it's long and it's not my letter. My name is Naomi Kotler, and I'm a registered nurse in the emergency department at Riverbend Hospital. 3 years ago, I moved to Oak Ridge with my family from Eugene for the numerous recreational opportunities. The news of the rock quarry, proposed rock quarry, has been troubling for myself and my family. And she talks about the concern about negative health effects of the quarry would have on people in the community. And first is being air. As a nurse in the ER, I care for individuals who struggle with acute and chronic respiratory conditions. I know that there is a large population of elderly and disabled individuals living in the Oak Ridge area who struggle with conditions such as COPD, asthma, and emphysema. And she's concerned about the exposure to the silica dust and diseases such as bronchitis, chronic airway obstruction, and lung cancer. The air quality issues we already have due to the wood smoke from wood stoves. And also she's talking about the indirect sources, not from the quarry itself, but from the rock quarry trucks of the dust, and we've already heard someone talk about that. Many Oak Ridge citizens who already struggle to breathe rely on ambulance transport, which is 40 miles to Eugene. Then she talks about noise pollution. Elderly individuals, especially those with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, struggle with confusion and fear from the daily blasts, which some compare to the sounds of loud bombs. We do have one individual within the 1,500 foot who is suffers from PTSD, and that individual is impaired due to noise or other concerns, problems that person has. The combat war veterans especially suffer from exposure to similar sounds in war zones. She says, I know for a fact there's a large population of veterans and elderly in the Oak Ridge area, and as a nurse, I am deeply concerned about the negative psychological effects from rock quarry blasts. And then she goes on to talk about water and the fact that the quarry is situated between Salmon Creek and Salt Creek, which are tributaries to the the middle fork of the Willamette River. She's concerned about the Salmon Creek Fish Hatchery, which is adjacent to the rock quarry, and potential water contamination and water turbidity in and around the fragile watershed. Our community deserves full transparency regarding any issues pertaining to our water supply. Sincerely, Naomi Kotler, RN Riverbend Hospital and Oak Ridge resident. Can I give this to you?
Thank you. So Kathy Picorni, followed by Jeff Allen.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Your numbers are dwindling by the minute here. And thank you to county folks who did a lot of work on putting this presentation together. My name is Kathy Picorni. My husband, Louis, and I live at 49153 Dunning Road, Oak Ridge, Oregon. We are very concerned about what the blasting will do to our water wells. Many residents in the immediate area have wells that are several hundred feet deep. Others of us have witched our wells and were able to tap into aquifers that are not so deep. But what will vibrations of the land due to those underground streams? The blasting plans refer to plans for structure and pipeline protection, but what of our wells? They don't address them. There are many veterans living in the Oak Ridge area and several in the immediate area of the proposed quarry, many of whom suffer from PTSD. They have settled here because of the quiet and undemanding lifestyle. They have extreme reactions to explosive noises. Should they be forced to sell their homes, uproot their lives, and move somewhere else? We would like to hear exactly how the quarry people propose to control all the dust. The last we heard, they have not been able to drill a productive water well. We certainly hope they are not intending to convince the city of Oak Ridge to sell them water from the new water tank they so magnanimously allowed the city to install on their property. The road, site, new well, and tank are all being paid for with grants and loans secured by the city of Oak Ridge, intended to provide fire protection for the industrial park and potable water to the city residents. That water is not intended for use by entities outside the city. If that is tried, just wait until the city residents, who already pay the highest water rates in the county, hear about this plan. Because of the mountains and canyons in the area, there is a prevailing breeze from the east in the morning and from the west in the afternoon. This means that the city of Oak Ridge will get the silica dust in the AM, and those of us living on the east side of the butte will receive the silica dust in the PM. Breathing this dust is very similar to breathing asbestos dust, according to those in the health and medical fields. There is no way the applicant will be able to control all the silica dust. Some folks have already left the Oak Ridge area since they were afraid of even the possibility of a quarry being located just east of town. There are more who will be forced to leave if this quarry is allowed to happen. The applicant's attorney and the county will tell you that you can only consider the points referenced in the remand. However, you also have a responsibility to the residents of this county and to those who voted you to these positions as commissioners. The people of Oak Ridge and the surrounding area deserve your consideration regarding their health and well-being. You might consider this as an extra time for having thoughts about items you need to give further consideration before making a final decision on the fate of TV Butte. Once blasting and digging happen on a mountain, There is no putting it back to its original shape or possible uses. Multiple uses have all been used up. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Allen, followed by Zach Middage, it looks like. Mickey? Mickey.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Allen. I live at 49065 Dunning Road, within 700 feet of the rock quarry. I have 50 acres, an airstrip going diagonally through it. If this quarry goes through and there's silica dust in the air, no one will fly around Oak Ridge. And that includes the Forest Service and helicopter pilots that fight forest fires. As you know, helicopters are very delicate machines when it comes to air pollution. The other point I'd like to address is the large game. The gentleman that's being paid by the quarry people is completely wrong. The large game that I see are elk, bear, and cougars coming out of the quarry area almost daily. My house faces that butte and down into the Old Town Oak Ridge. I've seen as many as 150 head of elk on my property at one time. That's far more than that report that he gave. I've seen 20 calves come out of that second growth timber on the east side of the quarry, which is where they really want to mine, this spring. More than 20 calves came out into the field adjacent to my property this spring. What is this silica dust going to do to the big game population here? Let alone disperse their calving ground, which is the east side of that butte. And they use it every year. You'll be destroying their calving ground. Besides destroying our community. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Zach Mickey, followed by Kevin Matthews.
Thank you, Chair Bozovich, Commissioners. Good afternoon. My name is Zach Mitke, and I represent a coalition of neighbors in and around Oak Ridge and close by that object to the proposed quarry. This coalition is called Save TV Butte. As you know, in January of this year, the neighbors successfully challenged the quarry on a basis of a variety of factors, including the applicant's attempts to incorporate substantially more area into the county's Goal 5 inventory than there was resource, and its failure to appropriately account for or appropriately minimize its impacts on the Goal 5 big game habitat or surrounding properties. On remand, unfortunately, the proposed quarry has made many of the same errors. The first step in the Goal 5 process for adding a new aggregate resource site to the list of the significant aggregate resource sites is to identify the aggregate resource site based on its location, quality, and quantity. In 2017, the applicant sought to amend the county's list of significant aggregate resource sites to include a 107-acre area based on a 46-acre resource. The neighbors challenged adding more than the 46-acre site to the resource area, and LUBA agreed, holding that, and I quote, "The only part of the property that may be included on the planned significant aggregate sites inventory is the part of the property where a significant aggregate resource is located," and concluding that the county erred by including 61 of the 107 acres into its inventory. However, The proposed ordinance is incorporating an even larger area on remand. I'll refer you to Section 1 of the proposed ordinance 1363, which identifies this area. The Lane County, and I quote, "The Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan is hereby amended to add the subject property shown on the mining area maps in Exhibit A, attached here to, and incorporated here, and depicted on tax lots 104 and 1900 of map 213515, tax lots 100 and 502 of map 213522, and tax lot 401 of map 213523 as a quarry mining area for the extraction and processing of aggregate resources to the Goal 5 inventory of significant mineral and aggregate sites, identified and included in Appendix D of the Mineral and Aggregate Resources Working Paper. This is not the 46-acre site. The described area to be included in the county's proposed inventory is more than 180 acres in size. The proposed resource area is almost 4 times the size of the resource area authorized by LUBA's decision. As the proposed ordinance conflicts with LUBA's prior order, we respectfully request that the same be denied. In addition, the proposed ordinance is also internally inconsistent in that it adopts findings that were previously rejected by LUBA. Section B1 attached and incorporated into in support of the proposed ordinance are the findings that supported the remanded prior approval and are clearly inconsistent with the LUBA decision. For example, the same identifies a significant resource area as 107 acres, rather than the 46 acres identified by LUBA or the 183 acres being proposed. It adopts the quarry site as the significant Goal 5 mineral and aggregate site by amending the county's comprehensive plan text and adding the site to the county's inventory of significant mineral and aggregate sites. That's a quote from page 60. Again, this is the 107-acre site. It's not what's being proposed. It's not what LUBA remanded on. It identifies no Goal 5 resources on the site. It concludes that big game habitat is not a Goal 5 resource, based on findings expressly rejected by LUBA in January of this year. It adopts findings related to silica dust and air blast and ground vibration that LUBA determined to be inadequate. As the proposed ordinance relies on inconsistent findings and ones which have already been rejected by LUBA, again, denial of the proposed ordinance is appropriate. Turning to the proposed new findings in Section B2 of the proposed ordinance, there are also errors. For example, at page 4, the applicant misstates the procedures on remand and then asks the board to perpetuate its mistake, stating that, and I quote, "The county notice for the remand proceedings should advise the public that the testimony is limited to the specific issues remanded by LUBA, and the board should deny any new issues raised on remand." That is not the law. As the Court of Appeals explained in Schatz versus City of Jacksonville, the logical corollary to the rule that resolved issues cannot be raised again is that issues may be considered on remand that were not or could not have been dispositively resolved on their merits in the appeal that resulted in the remand. That is, new issues that could not have been raised previously are fair game on remand. In this case, that would mean issues such as the impacts of the applicant's proposed mining operations on the adjacent forest template dwelling approved by the county on December 26, 2017. On property directly adjoining the site. The impacts from the applicant's proposed operations and the efficacy of its proposed measures were not raised and, more importantly, could not have been dispositively resolved in the prior proceedings because that factual circumstance, did not exist at that time. As the applicant does not address the impacts of its proposed operation on this new approved and sensitive use within the impact boundary, denial of the ordinance is appropriate for this reason as well. Finally, I'll point to some of the standards that have been pointed to by some of the applicant's representatives. Throughout the applicant's new materials, the applicants attempt to rely on standards that are not applicable to demonstrate compliance. The applicant is relying on DEQ noise standards in an effort to try and address impacts to elk habitat, which they're not intended to do. Likewise, with regard to air blast and vibrations from explosions on the site, the applicants are relying on inapplicable provisions of state and federal law. The noise standards at issue are what they say they are, regulations of sound pressure levels related to noise, and not to damaging concussions of air expelled by the applicant's blasting. Likewise, the NFPA provisions the applicant relies on were adopted by the state for the sole purpose of regulating pest control fireworks and do not regulate ground vibrations associated with the blasting. As the applicant's proposed minimization measures rely on inapplicable standards, the ordinance should be denied on this basis as well. In summation, the proposed ordinance at issue violates the prior remand by incorporating more land, incorporating findings that are internally inconsistent and conflict with LUBA's remand, incorporate procedural errors that would warrant remand and are based on an incomplete analysis of impacts from the proposed operation. Accordingly, we respectfully request that the ordinances be denied. Available for questions?
Thank you. Only question I have is your list of reasons for denial being submitted in writing?
It will be shortly.
I could not take notes as fast as you spoke.
Sorry.
So,
right.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the last person we have signed up is Kevin Matthews. And I'll ask for anyone else after Kevin.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Matthews. Patty and I raise horses downstream from Oak Ridge on the Middle Fork, Willamette, and Dexter. And I'm here as a pro bono land use planning and environmental consultant for Save TV Butte. Let me say at the outset that I support the options of either terminating this waste of time and treasure by denying the application outright, or the planning director's recommended option number 2 on your agenda item, which is to keep the record open for more information. Just for a bit of context, it's hard to get a feeling of how important TV Butte is for central and uptown Oak Ridge, but it occurred to me sitting here today that really it's very much like having a gravel mine proposed for Skinner's Butte that would, over the next 3 decades, drop the top of Skinner's Butte 300 or 400 feet by blasting. And we're now here this far away in uptown Oak Ridge. So how would having a gravel pit operating and lowering Skinner's Butte impact the sense of downtown Eugene? Oak Ridge has so much less to work with, and yet it's a similar kind of physical impact. The elk issue is really important from not just an environmental and aesthetic and recreational tourist kind of point of view, but it's pivotal in terms of the regulatory analysis. One of the biggest findings sent back from LUBA is that the elk habitat is an inventoried Goal 5 resource. When the previous application was done, the applicant and staff position was there are no inventoried habitat resources on this site, and so a whole bunch of analysis was not done that follows from that, including delineating the conflicts. Under the Goal 5 process, the commissioners have to determine what the conflicts are, and if those conflicts are not fully minimized, fully mitigated, then there's an ESEE analysis. You guys are familiar with that concept, a multi-factor analysis that supports the judgment call that the commissioners have to make to balance the existing inventoried Goal 5 big elk, big game habitat with inventorying a new conflicting Goal 5 use onto that same land. That's your job, but the problem here is that it hasn't remotely been dealt with yet. The elk report is kind of phoning it in. never mentions the importance of this site as a calving area, which we have in testimony today and repeated testimony going back through the record. This is a well-established fact, not even mentioned. When we get to the conflicts between elk habitat and the mine, which, as I'm trying to explain, is absolutely pivotal to the regulatory analysis, the consultant has identified two conflicts: a short-term displacement of elk due to activities like blasting and stuff that scare them away, and traffic collisions. Well, that overlooks the fundamental conflict, which is 107 acres of mine site, 46 of which is primary gravel resource, and the rest of it is mining operations area around that, which will be permanently removed from the elk habitat. So the biggest conflict is putting a mine on top of elk habitat. So the elk habitat is not there anymore. That habitat is eliminated, at least for generations, if you can imagine that a pit can be remediated into elk habitat. So just from a technical point of view, the applicant has not comprehended the complexity, which admittedly are tremendous, of how our responsibilities under Goal 5 to balance these resources play out. So you know, that calving area represents about 5% of the habitat range of that elk herd. That's their primary, that gets you a feeling, you know, 5%, that's where they calve. They don't calve all over the place. They have their favorite places. And it's a really special place because it's like they calve on the backside of Skinner's Butte. That close to downtown Oak Ridge, but that butte protects them from all the activity on the other side. And you heard it's 50 and 60 acre wild, and it's just a little bit more, and then it's forest land above that. So that special elk habitat goes back, you know, probably for hundreds of years. It's probably why the Native Americans use the site. So we can't accept the elk analysis since it's obviously fumbled the conflicts. Once you've got the conflicts, then you have to decide if they're fully minimized. But if you haven't even enumerated them, you haven't begun to minimize them. On the traffic collisions, after back and forth between staff and the consultant, the mitigation for traffic collisions to the elk is putting up an elk sign. Now, to avoid an ESEE analysis of the impacts of that particular conflict, traffic and elk, you have to find that that conflict has been minimized, you know, essentially to nothing, that has been fully mitigated. So does that elk sign fully mitigate the traffic conflicts? So let me move on. I hope we're going to have some record open so we can go back and forth and clarify some of this stuff for you. And this kind of gets into some of this law about what is and isn't in a remand, but on behalf of the Safe TV Butte, in the original application, I submitted a Dogami LiDAR image of the butte. The applicant's rebuttal said, those aren't landslide areas, don't worry, no problem, no off-site impact due to debris, no risk, no special characteristics around how the mine is operated, or that you should, because there are no landslides on the LiDAR. Well, curiously enough, in the package that's submitted for today's hearing, there's the same LiDAR image. I'm sure it's exactly the same data from Dogami, only this time it's submitted by a consultant to the city of Oak Ridge, and put in the file by the applicant, and it has outlined on it fully half of TV Butte as a large ancient landslide site. So you've got a serious contradiction in the factual record and in the things that weren't talked about before in the applicant's own submissions around the landslide safety of this. In the early report, the applicant's geologist says it's all hard rock, there's nothing to slide. The report that they've put in now that was done for the city of Oak Ridge for their water project says 10 feet of soil. 10 feet of soil with firs on it, building up on a landslide with a run out that can be 10 or 20 times the drop of the landslide. You're talking about real life safety things. So it's worth some scrutiny as to whether that's something you can think about on remand, given a contradiction in facts within the file on a critical life safety issue. I submit a written testimony, which is mostly this painfully nitty-gritty stuff about problems with the public notice. Because the conflicts have not been delineated, have not been determined by the commissioners, which is what the local government, what the OER says, we don't know whether the ESEE analysis pursuant to those resolving the conflicts between big game and gravel needs to be done. The public notice didn't allow for that. It has pretty strict, harsh language saying you can only talk about what's on remand. Zach talked about a different dimension of this problem. And really everybody here, the applicant and staff and the community, should be engaging in those ESEE analyses. In a normal Go5 process, you figure out the conflicts and you decide whether they're minimized or not. Then you know whether you have to do an ESEE analysis. Like that's the way the big inventories were done for the city of Eugene and so on. This process tries to pack a whole bunch of Goal 5 steps into one process. So to do that, you have to take testimony on all the steps because they can all happen in one board vote. So we've been told we can only talk about what's pursuant to that first level of things, and then there's all these other things that are part of the decision that we were told we couldn't talk about. So, you know, the way to correct a serious notice issue is to renotice and rerun the hearing. That's an option here. Finally, the community has heard from commissioners in similar cases, some different commissioners involved, and not trying to be personal about it. It's an abstract concept. But the community has heard that the OERs are very strict, and the commissioners are bound to make a decision by the way the flow chart of the rules plays out. And no doubt that's normally the case. And it's pretty hard under the Goal 5 process to not approve a gravel mine. However, there's one place where it's really clear that it is a judgment call of imponderables rather than anything clear and objective, and that is when you have conflicts that cannot be fully mitigated, like taking 100 acres of elk calving habitat and turning it into a mine pit. You have conflicts that can't be fully mitigated, so then you go into the whatever it is, the analysis, and ESE analysis, and the outcome of that analysis is a societal judgment that you are the deciders on. But the part I want to underline about that is, you are not compelled about how to make that judgment. You have scope of discretion in how you weigh energy versus society versus environment and so on. And once LUBA said you have significant Goal 5 elk, big game habitat on this site, it pretty much said this is going to end up being one of those discretionary decisions. So that's the gravity of your position, and you have my blessings for wearing it well. Thank you.
Thank you. So is there anyone else that would like to testify before we move to the staff and applicant? Seeing none, then I'll look to staff for any comments and then the applicant for rebuttal. Do you have any comments? Then I'll turn it over to the applicant.
Thank you, Chair Bozovich. Steve Pfeiffer again for the applicant. As predicted, and particularly with what I heard from the last speaker, we would support, as staff indicated at the front end, that the record be left open. You'll have a protocol. It's usually a 7-7-7 or 10-10. Mr. Mitaj made a number of allegations, and I too had a hard time following them. He hasn't submitted his written yet. I would ask you to encourage him to do so if you do leave the record open, so that there's a meaningful opportunity to actually respond to those claims. I will say, though, by way of rebuttal, as to the last speaker, there was a number of very abstract and confusing comments made there. But I will also say, as one who participated in the preparation of the rule in 1996 when I was serving on LCDC, it's exactly that kind of testimony that led the commission to literally preempt all 36 counties in aggregate permitting and impose one set of standard on all counties, on all boards, for approval of aggregate mining operations, so that we could have clarity, so that we could have predictability, so that we could avoid terms like abstract discretion, which do not exist. Secondly, I would remind that speaker that a careful reading of the rule will reveal that impacts, conflicts, do not have to be mitigated within a Goal 5 resource site itself. That means on this site, if you choose to readopt, and there's 46 acres of aggregate inventory added to your significance inventory, there are no conflicts to be addressed, resolved, or mitigated within those 46. The rule was intentionally written for obvious reasons to most people, that we will not thwart the obvious opportunity to mine by precluding any disruption of the area where we find significant aggregate resources. It's there for a reason. It's repeated in every county decision, and much of the testimony I heard is simply ignorant of that fact in the rule. With that, one last point. I take a lot of personal offense to the misrepresentation of what this application says by the last speaker. There was testimony presented to this board, there were findings adopted by a majority of this board that impacts, conflicts, or impacts, choose your term, were addressed. This board found they were minimized, not completely as it was suggested, but as the rule says, to a level no longer significant. If you make that finding then, as you did, and if you make that finding again on remand and approve, there is clearly, by the terms of the rule, no need for an EC analysis. An EC analysis is required by a plain reading of the rule only if, as we have done with our submittal and you did in round one and we know you will do again, you assess whether those conflicts have been minimized. If you find they have been, as you did last time, there's no EC required. That was not what you heard, but that is what the law is. So with that, I would urge you to leave the record open. You'll handle it in whatever your standard protocol is, 7, 7, and 7, probably with the last 7 available for argument only. No new evidence by the applicant. Here for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks.
Thank you. So with that, I will look to the board about closing the public hearing. Is there any objection to closing the public hearing at this time that we can discuss?
I had some questions of our staff. I wanted to get your view, any one of the 3 of you. I wanted to get your view on whether or not first of all, whether bears and cougars are considered big game for purposes of big game habitat. We heard testimony about bears and cougars and a lot of reference to the big game rule, but I didn't hear the connection between the big game rule and the bears and cougar.
I'm not a big game expert. I'm not sure. I would assume that.
You're not a big expert, or you're not a
neither
big game expert?
Yes, neither. I would assume that cougars and bears are part of the big game classification, but.
Okay.
But
and there wasn't a lot of testimony by the applicant about what the impact of the mining operation would be on bears and cougars. There was quite a bit on deer and elk, but not about bears and cougars.
Yeah, and I can't tell you everything that's in the report that's been submitted, whether that's discussed or not, or.
Okay.
There hasn't been a whole lot of evidence I've heard that there are bear and cougar there in quantities that are at issue. But.
Okay. And then my other question about the about big game was in terms of the elk habitat. Apparently, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has identified elk habitat in elk range in this area and overlapping with the area of the proposed mine, but I still wasn't clear about the distinction between an elk calving area and an elk habitat. Is there any lawful distinction? I mean, obviously, there's a practical distinction between areas where elk go and areas where elk mothers go to have elk babies. Is there any legal distinction between elk habitat and elk calving areas?
There isn't any legal distinction that I'm aware of. I would assume that it's the potential impacts to general elk habitat versus known calving habitat may be of import and interest to the experts who weighed in, but there's no legal difference.
Now, is there a proposed finding that says that the existence of the elk habitat that the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has identified, that somehow that is okay or that is mitigated by the proposal that the applicant has? I'm not sure, are we saying that there won't be any impact on elk habitat by the existence of the mine? Is that, and therefore the opponents go, well, of course the elk habitat's affected by the location of the elk, the mine in the middle of elk, designated elk habitat. Is that, explain to me how we could come to the conclusion that this doesn't affect elk.
If I can just interject a little. The applicant's expert testimony did find that the two conflicts were going to be displacement and collisions conflict. But
So displacement, what, does that mean they won't go there?
that because of the impacts to the mine, that elk would be potentially displaced from the activities from the mining operation. But the conclusion was that it wasn't going to cause a significant conflict in resident deer and elk in the impact area, and that they were proposing reducing that impact for conditions of approval 21 through 24 in the original conditions, and by adding the signage condition warning deer and elk in the area.
Warning the deer and elk?
Warning
Of deer and elk.
Excuse me,
warning vehicles
vehicles.
along Dunning Road
Okay,
of deer and elk in the area.
yep. Okay, so the issue is, does the board find it significant or not?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So I've already heard in the testimony, and I didn't mention this earlier, so I'll mention it again now, that, you know, anyone can request that the record be held open, and we're required to hold it open. And it's been mentioned twice by both the opponent and the applicant to hold the record open. So I know that at the conclusion of this hearing, we'll be holding the record open. We won't be making a decision today because we'll have to wait for that record to close and then carry on any deliberations at that point. So obviously, as we look at what the options were that were presented to the board, option one is not an option today to approve the ordinance as presented. We will be holding the record open. So the only options open to us are how we hold that record open and whether we close the hearing today or continue the hearing. So I would like to hear from the board if there's any desire to continue the hearing or whether we can close the hearing and just hold the record open for written testimony and go through the additional testimony and rebuttal process that we usually go through with written record.
Well, since the proponents and opponents have to respond to what we want to do in terms of keeping the record open, I guess I'd like to hear from people that would plan on submitting additional information. If they need 7 days, then I'm certainly open to 7 days. That was suggested, I think, over here.
If I can interrupt, sorry, Commissioner, our suggestion was going to be to do sort of a two-week thing, so a total of 6 weeks, given the nature of the complexity of the issues, gives folks time to.
Not a 7 day.
Right, doubling that,
14.
doubling the usual.
Okay.
Because if there's no objection, what I'd like to do is close the public hearing, and then I will accept motions to approve this reading and hold the record open, et cetera, and set the next reading up. And I think we've got a date certain. I don't think we need a time certain if we're not having a hearing. If we're just going to deliberate, we can do that without a time certain, just the date.
So 2 weeks will be October 9th.
Yeah, I think, 2 weeks is October 9th for the record. Yeah, if you want to run through that, so whoever's making the motion can make it correctly.
Deanna and Lydia are doing sort of calculating the dates, but.
I think we end up with our next reading being on November 6th.
Sort of, a slight gloss on that. I think 2 weeks for additional evidence into the record, and then 2 weeks for evidentiary stuff for the applicant to respond to, for anybody to respond to new evidence that's into the record. So 2 weeks and 2 weeks, and then a final 5 days or a week or whatever it ends up being for written rebuttal from the applicant. The applicant is willing to shorten its final timeline to a week or 5 days.
Yeah, and that final is not evidence, it's just legal argument.
Just argument at that point.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, staff then will, once those record periods have closed, then staff will need additional time. We can't have a hearing that day or come back that day because we'll need to compile that information and provide another staff report to the board.
What day would you anticipate the board would be hearing if the staff had a reasonable time to look at the materials that had been submitted by the proponents and opponents?
So if we do 2 weeks, 1 week, that gives us October 9th, October 23rd, October 30th. Is that right? Yes. My calculations.
And then the month of November is complex. It's either the 6th, which would be a very quick turnaround for staff. And remember that we need the items 2 weeks in advance from staff. So I can't see us doing this before November 27th.
That would be the earliest.
That would be the earliest that I think we could return this.
And we're down on the 20th, so the 27th. Are we down on the 20th?
We're down the 13th.
We're down the 13th for, it's Veterans Day weekend and AOC, and then the week of Thanksgiving, we traditionally take off. So that would give us Tuesday, the 27th is the day for this to return.
So we'll get October 9th, 23rd, October 30th, and November 27th is the dates.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Chair?
At 1:30 in the afternoon on November 27th.
Do we need a time, how we, on
We wouldn't
November
need a time
27th, is
certain.
afternoon okay? Yeah, because we had, November 6th would have been an issue in the afternoon, so.
You haven't, just a reminder, you haven't yet closed the hearing. So,
Yeah.
assuming
I'm
you
hoping we
do
can
that, you won't need a time
I hope we can do that as part of the motion. to
Right.
Close the public hearing, extend the record, do all that in one motion. If we can get all that worked out, I can ask somebody to make that motion. Before we get to that, though, I'd like to just ask staff if they might be able to at least address the issue of bringing in new issues outside the remand. I know that there's other appeals court issues on that, Beck versus the city of Tillamook. Set that standard about bringing in new issues outside of remand. And I think there's also, an opportunity that if somebody felt like there was an issue that was missed in the Luba decision, that decision, the remand could actually be challenged.
Well,
is that true, or am I just not? I'm not an attorney, so I'm really wading into places I'm not comfortable.
I think I understand the question, but to summarize, I don't disagree with Mr. Mitke's analysis. That is, your review in this case is constrained by two things. One is the issues Luba identified in its decision leading to its remand. We know that. The other piece is additional issues that could not have been raised the first time through, but suddenly are real issues now. I think Mr. Mitke mentioned a new template dwelling in the vicinity that maybe needs to be incorporated into the analysis of the sort of impacts are out there. If there are issues that could have been raised the first time, or that were raised the first time, but were not the subject of the remand, those things are off the table in terms of this board's decision-making.
Right. I think that makes some sense to, Mr. Pfeiffer, did you, yeah, we haven't closed the hearing yet, so.
The issue that Zach raises is an interesting one, but I think I actually have a different take on it without thinking too much about it. I don't believe the presence of a new fact, even if it exists, such as his allegation is there's a new house out there that wasn't there before. That doesn't allow, that's not an issue that could be raised, that couldn't have been raised before. That's simply a new fact. That the issues that are back on remand will need to be applied to, perhaps. But that's not an issue. The mere presence of a new fact, any more than the presence of a new road in an area that's back on remand, doesn't create an issue. That's not a legal issue. That's just a new fact. And that's something that may need to be addressed. But I don't believe it reopens the window on remand from your notice to limit the issues that are available to the four that are identified.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I think it's sort of a semantic issue primarily.
It'd be more likely that if, say, the proposal to address one of the remand issues brought up a new issue, that would be something that somebody could bring in. Supposedly, say the dust control on the drills brought up some other new issue that was a concern for impact. That could be, the proposals they've made to address the remand or some change in the application or change in the relative to the remand, that could be brought, those bring in a new issue that could be where things come about. So I kind of get that. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of clarify that because I didn't know if we needed to address that prior to the next reading and all that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to address before we left some of these subjects. I guess I have one question for staff because it did come up in testimony, and that is, without going back and rereading some of the conditions, being sure we've got a tight condition relative to monitoring of blasting and reporting on that. Is that well conditioned in requiring that there's reports back to the county from some kind of third-party monitoring on that? Because
We were actually looking
I
at
know we don't have the tech expertise to monitor that or the staff that's going to monitor that day to day.
Right, but we do have a condition. Deanna, do you have it in front of you?
Yes, acoustic-related condition number 25C says within 30 days completion of the noise compliance measurement period, a report must be provided to the county showing the results of all the initial noise compliance measurements made on behalf of the applicant. So that's that one, what I could see right now.
I guess we'll have to have the discussion whether that's a strong enough condition or not. I just, knowing that if we make any changes in the conditions, it's going to require a fourth reading and all that on the next round. And I'm not prepared to try and wordsmith conditions right now.
No, but what we can do is listen to the testimony, review the conditions, and if we think that there's a place that we need to strengthen the conditions of approval, then we can bring that back to the board as we can submit that into the record essentially as part of the open record period.
Right. And I think some of that may be sifted out too in the additional written testimony based on new evidence submitted and the rebuttal and arguments that we get might clarify some of the need to change conditions when we get to the next reading.
And that would be a simple revision of the existing conditions, just changing the language of number 25, for instance, should that be necessary.
So can I also add that I'm just reading the proposed blasting condition, number 57 speaks to the blast measurement report to include pressure levels of the blast energy must be provided to the county within 10 business days after the blast event. So that might need to be some comparison to what was existing to what is proposed.
So Commissioner Farr, could you repeat your question? I'm sorry.
I think Ms. Wright just answered.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so do you guys have a wording of how to make a motion to close the hearing, approve the second reading, set the third reading, including the open record periods and all that? Can somebody give us all
I
that?
could give it a try if you want to grade me on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a date? 27th.
I have dates written down.
27th, is that where that's, okay.
So I think Pat's going to take a shot at it.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I move to close the public hearing and extend the open record till October 9th, allow 2 weeks till October 23rd for a response to the additional record, with a staff report back by October 30th. Is that the wrong words?
The final period is for the applicant to respond, for the applicant's final rebuttal by October 30th.
October 30th. Applicant's final rebuttal by October 30th, and established November 27th as a third reading.
At 1:30 in the afternoon?
At 1:30?
Or just, we don't have to have a
Said
time
no
certain
time, so let's not have
because
time
we're closing the hearing.
Oh, it would be 1:30 in the afternoon.
Oh, it will
Second.
be, yeah.
To
There's a motion and a second, so I'll see if I can repeat the motion one more time. So the motion is to close the public hearing on ordinance number PA 1363 and approving the second reading, holding the written record open for 14 days. And that's
any additional.
October 9th for any additional testimony. And that's 4 PM on October 9th. I want to clarify that.
4 p.m.
You know,
I was thinking 5 p.m. But
Yeah, they close at 4. And then allowing another 2 weeks to respond to any additional testimony in writing,
the 23rd.
which is October 23rd at 4 PM. And then allowing the applicant to submit final arguments, legal arguments and rebuttal on that testimony
30th.
October 30th, 4 PM, and then setting the third reading for November 27th. It was moved by Commissioner Farr, seconded by Commissioner Sorensen.
Clarified by Chair Bozievich.
So with that, is there any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, I call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 3-0 with Commissioners Lycan and Williams excused. And I will note to people that Commissioner Williams in advance had let me know he was going to have to leave early, and he planned to watch back the videotape of this testimony later on this evening. And Commissioner Lycan's dealing with a family crisis today and had to leave our meeting this morning a couple times, and that's why he had to get up and leave. So he apologizes, and I'm pretty sure he'll catch up on the verbal testimony also before November 27th. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and thank you for a civil set of testimony.
How could we review this video testimony?
Oh, it'll be available online. I think tomorrow you can probably come back and watch it. Devin, do you know exactly? Yeah,
Thank you, Board.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Yeah. So with that, we are back to Commissioners' business, which we skipped over. So is there any announcements from Commissioners?
Made mine already.
Yep, I kind of got mine covered earlier, too. Commissioner Sorensen, how about agenda team requests, work session requests?
Just the one that we had earlier that was actually incorporated in the body of the meeting.
Yep, I think we caught that with head nods earlier.
From the public comment?
Yes.
Yep.
So then
Did you
I'll,
get that, Mr. Rickoff?
well, we'll catch it right now because the next item is review of assignments. So, Mr. Rickoff, do you have?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, the ambient noise is disconcerting. First of all, let me apologize because I was correct the first time. Chair Bozievich, Commissioner Sorensen, Materials are available to the public the Thursday before the next week's meeting. The 2-week deadline is the advance date when materials are due to the county administration. So it was a miscommunication between Diane Jones and myself.
2 weeks ahead of what, though?
2 weeks ahead of when the material comes before the board. So the materials that are made public the Thursday before they come to the board.
So there's about a 10-day period between the time that the materials are submitted before they're put on the,
It's actually a 5-day.
Well, no, it's about 10, they come in 2 weeks on a Tuesday before the board meeting.
right?
But they're not
And then
posted.
we have to have one that goes through legal counsel and et cetera. Then they come to agenda committee on that Tuesday before. So there's really, until that Tuesday, they're not set to go on the agenda. Then they got to get prepared and everything, and then they're actually publicized Thursday. So there's not a big lag period between when a department submits a consent agenda item and it's actually ready to be publicized to the public. You know, because there's some process in between that 2-week deadline to get it to county administration and when it's ready to actually.
Budget, legal.
Yeah.
Correct. Thank you
Just
so much.
check the impacts and all that. Yeah, so there's not a big, I know what you're thinking of is could we publicize it sooner, and it's kind of a, not quite there.
Yep.
Wish we could, but it's just,
So, Chair Bosevich, the commissioners, as I understand it, the assignments are prepare a 1-year extension to the Travel County contract for your consideration and decision. In that ordinance number PA 1363,
excuse me a second, Craig.
the remand.
Folks, hey, folks, could you guys carry the conversation out into the hallway if you don't mind? Really getting a little loud. Thank you. We still got just a little bit of business to conclude.
Ordinance
Okay, great.
number PA 1363, this remand will return to the board for consideration deliberation on November 27th. If there was a Sears Road request, I'm not clear on that, other than the fact that work should be done prior to it being presented to the board, that this concern should be expressed and should be considered and hopefully worked out in detail prior to the recommendation coming forward to the board.
Well, what do you think would be a good way to summarize the response to the public comment?
This Sears Road comment.
The Sears
I
Road.
think we still have yet to get a proposal from the TAC. So without a proposal, there wasn't, but I think the board said we would highly consider the testimony and maybe be remanding it back to the TAC for another try.
I will certainly have, and I know Director Hurley was in the room, and I will certainly have a conversation with Director Hurley regarding that particular recommendation.
Yeah, and I think there was some desire it seemed like by the board also to have that animal services folks take a quick look at that proposed language around change in lane code.
Yeah, to have animal services get in touch with Mr. Ritter regarding his proposal and what could be done, pro, con, or otherwise, with Mr. Ritter's proposal.
And it was a Multnomah County ordinance he was citing.
Well, he kind of morphed Multnomah's into ours, which wasn't quite the same.
Okay, I have that. There were two other items that were not official assignments, but I did hear the interest in making it clear that the Travel County performance audit not happen sooner than 5 years from now. We'll find a way to incorporate that into the 1-year extension conversation. And although this is not an assignment, please note that I have asked Mr. Hurley as well to ensure that there is a light fixture inspection for the Eugene City Council meeting tomorrow at noon, so that we will not have a repeat of that incident.
Yeah, that would have hurt.
See,
That would have left a mark.
it hit right here. And after Commissioner Williams left, I moved over here. So it hit.
Can you place that where it hit so that
It's easiest spot.
it's, okay, we have a scar on the desk? Yes, that was deeply disconcerting, and my apologies to you all.
Them walking up there and just before it happened, so.
Yes,
There's somebody
and
heavy-footed.
was able to communicate, and they got off the roof as quickly as they could. And I've seen staff direction to make sure that an inspection will take place.
The ding in that could have easily been matched in my head.
Dang.
Just a foot off.
It's
Thank
not
you.
light either.
I appreciate that. So is there any other assignments that were missed? Is there any other business for the board? Then we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.